So let's dive right on into today's webinar, Sandstorm or Significant, the Evolving Role of Context in Incident Management. Our speaker today is a very, very knowledgeable guy. His name is Matthew Beckman. He's developer advocate at Victor Ops. Welcome, Matthew. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Charlene.
I'm going to just turn things right on over to you so you can get right started.
Great. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you everyone on the call for joining us. And particularly thanks to DevOps.com for hosting this and all of the events that you guys do. I think it's super meaningful, the platform that you're creating for teams who are figuring DevOps out, to give them a place to, a resource to use and a place to have these kinds of conversations. So with that, again, my name is Matthew Beckman. Today I'm working with Victor Ops as a developer advocate, trying to help make on-call and incident management better for teams. My background is about 18 years of direct on-call experience, both as a first responder and as a manager and leader of teams in that space. So I've had a lot of time to think about and observe firsthand what works, what doesn't, and what are areas the teams can focus on as they're looking to grow and enhance their incident management practice. Briefly on Victor Ops, if you're unfamiliar with us, Victor Ops provides a real-time incident management and routing system, essentially capable of ingesting alerts from any upstream source you may have, monitoring systems, intelligence systems, log analytics systems, whatever you may want to alert from can be routed into the Victor Ops system, which then manages rotation, scheduling, escalations, and notification of your on-call team, and provides sort of an end-to-end suite for managing that incident, inclusive of a pretty robust back-end that gives you reporting and tools for postmortem and other sort of after-action analysis concerns. So that's sort of what Victor Ops does. What we try to do as a WHO is focus on some leadership within the community to be effective advocates for teams and really try to understand, again, what are the pain points for incident management teams or on-call teams, and what can we do, certainly from a product standpoint, but moreover from a community and an advocacy standpoint to help teams forward, help them move through those pain points. So that's a great way to sort of introduce something that will give us context today in our conversation, and that's the incident management assessment. This is a short survey. It takes about 10 minutes. There will be a link at the end of the webinar, but I'd like to ask everybody on the call today to take a few moments and complete the survey. The incident management assessment will walk responders through a series of questions that describe both behaviors that your team exhibits in managing incidents, as well as the language that your team may use to describe incidents. The goal of that is then to be able to provide your team some insightful guidance on what you may be able to do to move past current pain points. Through that, we've sort of tried to distill down for all types of incidents, any kind of alert, any kind of situation that a team's responding to, what are some common phases that are true for all of them? And this is really going to be sort of our structure for the conversation today. So let's take a moment and explore this. The first phase of incident management, everybody's going to intuitively guess, is detection. Somehow or other, something has to be aware that something is wrong. Certainly monitoring systems, Nagios, Xenos, Zabbix are all great examples of that. But what we're seeing from this survey and what we're trying to understand is what are all of the ways that teams are being made aware of incidents. Detection can be customer support queues inbound from our clients. They could be something, detection could be someone running down the hall screaming the site is down, and at all levels of relative maturity, you have to detect a problem for the incident management process to begin. The second phase is response. That detection now has to go to someone to do something about it. This is where we're really talking about the alert gets triggered to the on-call responder. That person may escalate, may respond to the alert back and acknowledge receipt of it. This is sort of the first few moments of human involvement in incident management. Again, at low maturity, the person running down the hall may be running to an office in particular to let that person know that there's a problem. The next phase is remediation, and this is really the meat of incident management and response, and that's where we're going to solve the problem. We're going to deploy a fix. we're going to address whatever was the detected condition in the first phase. And for a lot of folks, this really constitutes what they think about when they think about incident management. It's detect, respond, remediate, those three things, and that's sort of the end of the life cycle. And certainly we take a different view and try to expand people's view of incident management to be inclusive of two very important after-action phases, the first of which is analysis. This is sort of past the point of remediation, where we're really going to try and understand how or why. What were the root causes of this incident? What was the proximal cause? What were contributing factors? What could we do to make this not recur? And I think that an interesting dimension to bring into this analysis phase isn't only focused on the incident itself and maybe the infrastructure or application or system contributing factors, but it's the opportunity to review the previous three phases at a team level. Did we detect it soon enough? Did the team respond in a timely manner? Was our diagnosis or our diagnostic process consistent, or was it haphazard and misdirected? Trying to understand how and why around that incident, both on the dimension of the system that generated it and how the team responded. And the last phase, which might be the most important, is readiness, taking that learning forward into something actionable. This is where we're going to talk about improving the infrastructure, maybe trying to create a game day to bring a scenario forward that gives us an opportunity to practice responding to that kind of incident in the future, really where we're focused on actionable learning from our incident. So if we try to map that to an environment or an idea of an environment that we can probably all understand, ultimately for all environments there's going to be monitored systems on the left. These are the things that we care about, that if something goes bump in the night, we know. We have a or increasingly multiple monitoring systems that are watching them. We have something akin to an incident management system. Again, this is where the VictorOps platform lives. This may be as simple as email or a proc mail recipe, and may be as advanced as a full-blown real-time incident management platform. We have an incident responder. Hopefully they're not alone and they're part of a team, but someone's going to receive that notification. And then on the far right, we really have sort of the universe of resources that are available for that responder to understand the context of the alert or of the incident. These are status pages, system metrics, logs, runbooks, subject matter experts. Frequently the best way to understand the current situation is to escalate to someone who's more familiar with that system than you are. If we map our 5 phases across it, detection lives here between monitored and monitoring. Response is really a function of the incident management system and the responder. Remediation is entirely around that responder getting situational context, forming a hypothesis, and then testing that hypothesis by introducing change back to the monitored systems. And then analysis and readiness, as I mentioned, are sort of after-action elements that create a feedback loop into those monitored systems and the architectural decisions we make moving forward. So when you complete the IMA, what we're going to do is map the responses that we receive from you at 5 levels of maturity: novice, beginner, competent, proficient, and expert, across our 5 phases of incident management: detection, response, remediation, analysis, and preparedness or readiness. It's really important to bring up here, and as you can kind of expect, everybody's going to form some kind of scatter plot across those different phases of both maturity and incident management practice. But what we find in our early responses and just conversations with people in the community at large, first and foremost, novice is by no means a derogatory statement. It's just a reflection of how mature a practice can be. But that sort of lower level of maturity can be shared by companies in vastly different industries and sizes. Certainly, a startup team of 5 people will have a relatively immature incident management practice. But a company that's been around for 20 years with 40,000 employees may also be relatively young or immature in their adoption of formal incident management. And that's what we think is particularly interesting about this survey, is it's going to give folks some chance to get a gauge of where their practice is relative to other peers in the industry, and give you, again, specific actionable suggestions. If you want to move from beginner to competent in a response phase, what are some examples of what people are doing in the competent bucket that you can focus on? And then lastly, for us at VictorOps, we're super interested in the data associated with it because we think that it can give us a much clearer picture of what the market looks like as a whole. You know, as DevOps practitioners, we sometimes live in a bit of an echo chamber that can lead you to believe that incident management is great and everybody has adopted continuous deployment and lots of new technologies and methodologies to make things better. But under the surface, we find that adoption is not quite as widespread as we may think. So that's enough about incident management, but hopefully it gives us good context for the rest of the discussion today. I want to pause real quick and let everyone respond to our first poll of the day and just ask, how would you rate your overall team's incident management maturity?
Yeah, so you can see the poll is up on your screen, so go ahead and make your choice. You've got novice, beginner, competent, proficient, or expert. Choose only one, and we will give you guys about 5 more seconds to make your choice, and then we'll talk about the results. Okay, great. So the poll is closed now. Looks like we've got a lot of beginners and a lot of proficients, and right in between the competents, but no novices and no experts. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, Matt.
You know, I think that's a great thing, and you know, very much to my point about the sort of audience, I think here, you know, folks who are interested in DevOps have almost definitionally spent some time focused on incident management and trying to get better at these things. That's you know, clearly constant improvement or continuous improvement is a core tenet of DevOps. So that's great to see those results. And again, what we're trying to understand is what do those results look like across a wide swath of the industry. So let's get to our focus question today, and that's really how can we help teams mature this incident management practice? Stated plainly, how can we make on-call suck less? This is the VictorOps tagline. And the thesis that I want to present and talk about for the rest of our time is that situational context and helping teams get their feet under them and get aware of the situation they're responding to is the most meaningful, low-effort, high-value thing we can do for our teams. Context is really the way that we understand the world around us. There's data and information that we swim in every day, both in our lives and in our systems, and selecting which of those things are meaningful and significant forms our contextual understanding of an event that guides and informs our actions, and for an on-call and incident management team can really be a step function to moving things forward and getting better. So let's talk about some key metrics that I think we're all familiar with. Mean time to repair, of course, is probably the most meaningful, maybe not the most meaningful, but the most commonly adopted metric that teams focus on, if nothing else, because it informs our ability to deliver on our SLAs or our promise of availability to the rest of the business. Oftentimes, teams are also going to be looking at ticket volumes, how frequently a particular incident or groups of incidents are escalated, how satisfied our customers are with our resolution or our remediation of a particular incident. There are, of course, many other metrics that are important, but for the rest of our time today, we're going to focus on this mean time to repair. And what I like about it, this is a vendor slide that I had a few years ago, averages mask dramatic local variations, which I thought was very nicely stated as a small bullet point. But you know, when you think about the time to repair, a team can focus on trying to take the worst incidents down a few notches, but they rarely focus on trying to take, you know, the small incidents down a couple of notches. And if you really want to affect the mean, you've got to try and focus on effort that affects all incidents across the board, not just the worst and not just the easiest, but what's a thing that we can do that can genuinely impact that mean. So this is where we're going to have our conversation. So as we look at, you know, low maturity on incident management practice, this won't surprise anybody. Those teams spend all of their time firefighting. The detection phase takes a very long time because those systems are relatively immature. The site may be down, or a particular piece of functionality in our application may be unavailable for a long time before we're even aware of it. That counts towards our TTR metric. The response may be haphazard or informal. Teams may not be clear where lines of responsibility delineate and who is supposed to do what. The remediation phase in those teams is almost always highly chaotic We're going to start with things like rebooting the application or restarting a server, and sort of go from there. And all of that sort of culminates in an awful lot of time spent managing incidents. Now you'll notice that in those teams, the amount of time that they've got to dedicate to analysis and remediation, or excuse me, analysis and readiness, is very small. And this creates really a terrible situation for them, which is they cannot spend the time they need to get off the proverbial treadmill to actually do the things necessary to reduce the mean time to repair. Language that we hear from responders in this incident management assessment around here are things like, we'd like to postmortem, but there isn't time. I spent so much time managing alerts this week that my projects were behind, so I had to play catch up. And they really are in a sort of a cycle that they can't get out of. When we see teams really start to focus on incident management, certainly they're able to reduce the time they're spending repairing incidents, and that's great. This is full stop a win for the team and the business that they work for. The incidents are being responded to and remediated in less time. That's great. And we see that those teams in the medium maturity block, which looks like many of the responders on the call today, are spending time in analysis and readiness, and that's fantastic. But you'll notice that we've got some gaps here. And usually the sort of next stumbling block for teams to move from medium maturity to high maturity is that time gets filled up with other projects and other pursuits. It doesn't get reinvested back into the incident management practice, which is unfortunate because teams at high maturity really have got things figured out. Their TTR is down very low. Detection and response happen almost automatically and consistent with the particular moment that a new condition presents. The remediation efforts certainly still take longer, but they shrunk those down through formal process adoption of diagnostics. They've empowered their teams with excellent context to be able to quickly identify and resolve causes to incidents. But moreover, they've deeply invested in the analysis and readiness phases of incident management. And what that enables a team to do is really focus on a new core metric that I'd like us to start talking about in the community, and that's time to learn. How much of your incident management practice is spent fighting fires, and how much of it is spent actually doing the things necessary to prevent those fires in the first place, or to set the team up to succeed at fighting the fire when it does occur. In analysis, we're actually able to identify trends. We can do some thoughtful capacity planning to really improve the infrastructure, make it more resilient, make it recover quicker or in a more timely manner. We actually might be able to do that game day for readiness that we've always talked about. I know in my own experience there were dozens of times that we got really excited about the idea of Chaos Monkey, but then we sat down and tried to determine how we would actually create the environment in which to do it, and it never got done. And by investing that time in readiness, you can actually do those things, cross-training your teams, updating your run books, you name it. This is a core metric that teams need to focus on to really move their incident management practice forward. First, by reducing the time to repair, but then second, taking that additional time that we clawed back and investing it in time to learn. So that's probably enough sort of high-level stuff. Let's actually talk about this idea of situational context and why it's meaningful in specific. This is an alert that has arrived at my theoretical incident responder. Beep, 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 uh-oh. The test web host is critical. The load average is almost 8. Okay, that sounds bad. It's probably bad, otherwise I wouldn't be getting alerted to it. But there's really nothing for me to do or think or hypothesize based on the information that's presented to me in this pretty standard, boring alert. And if we think about that, what it means is a monitored system here on the left has reached this condition. The monitoring system has identified it. It has sent the alert to an incident responder, and now the incident responder is going to roll up their sleeves and try and figure out what's going on. And a pretty standard sort of diagnostic procedure. If we map this back to our 3 phases, we're now cleanly in response and remediation. What are we going to do with this alert? Let's, again, for the sake of argument, say they're remote, so they're getting their laptop open, they're firing up the VPN, they're maybe going to go to Graphite or whatever our dashboarding system is. searching for the server name, test-web host, sort of navigating through a bunch of drop-downs, just trying to find the relevant section that's associated with the alert that just landed on our phone. Probably going to pull up Jira or ServiceNow or Rally or whatever our ticketing system or ITSM system are and see, is there a history associated with this host? Does this happen frequently? Is there some maintenance that's going on today that may be, causal or proximal to this alert? We're going to review runbooks for that host. Is this a known condition? What should I do when the load is high on this particular system? And, the spoilers is everything that I've just outlined here takes time. Depending on the complexity of your environment and lots of other factors, there's a minimum of 10 minutes here that the responder is wasting just establishing situational context before they can do anything meaningful to change the reality of this incident. And when you think about the things that I just outlined, there's some common themes that we hear from people, again, at all maturities across DevOps or just incident management as a whole. Frequently, there are going to be multiple sources of record. You probably have 3 or 4 things that are watching load on every one of your systems. Which is the one that I should focus on? Almost certainly, there are duplicative runbooks or pages that say variants of the same thing, or we're migrating from one wiki system to another, and I'm not sure which one is most important. There can be just basic discoverability problems for common search patterns. Which of the fields, if I go back to my alert, which of the fields of this alert should I even be searching on in the wiki or the runbook system to actually find what I'm trying to find? And of course, a compounding effect for many teams is just an overload of metrics. We'll talk a lot about that as we get to the Sandstorm part of the talk, but this idea that there's lots of data for me to look at what's meaningful in this context. And what we see for all teams, it sort of all maturities, as they adopt DevOps practices, all of these problems sort of get multiplied because we have new responders unfamiliar with systems. Certainly, the ops team who's been doing this for years knows which of those graphs is meaningful for a load average. For the developer who's in their second official rotation in their professional career, the situation is far less clear. So I'd like to just, again, get a gauge here from the audience how much that resonates with you. So of the couple of things that I threw out there, which is most painful problem you or your team experiences as you're trying to establish some context for incident management? Is it the multiple sources of record? Is it duplicate documentation, metric overload? Is everything in your practice equally on fire, or is everything fantastic and you really don't see this as a problem?
Great. So we'll give people about 10 seconds or so to respond to this. Also want to remind people that the responses to all of the polling questions are going out on Twitter, so be sure to check your Twitter feed. I also want to remind the audience that we are taking questions from Matt. So at any time, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them, go ahead and submit them. And then before we end the webinar, we will be taking questions. So, but don't wait. Go ahead and get them in now. Okay, I think we are ready to take a look at the polling results. Looks like multiple sources of record is the big winner. Followed by duplicate documentation and metrics overload. What do you think of those responses, Matt?
Yeah, it mirrors, I think, almost everything that we've seen, both informally in conversations just in the space, as well as the early responses we're getting back to incident management. And again, this is great that multiple sources of record is on the list because it's a big part of the rest of the webinar. I'm happy, though, to see that a few people have actually said that everything's fantastic. Follow up with me later and we can collaborate on the next webinar. I'd love to learn what you guys are doing, you guys and gals are doing to make it work. So let's get back to our alert and actually see what we can do to change this fact pattern to make situational context easier. So here's our unhelpful load average critical alert, not so great. Let's pretend that incident responder has actually found the meaningful graph that they're going to look at. This is a tale of two graphs. The first graph shows our CPU load over time. We have a clear, massive spike above the expected norm. I have a real problem. It's time to fire up my laptop, put a pot of coffee on, and dig in. And my urgency has changed. My priority is, I shouldn't say changed, my urgency is established. The priority is high. this might be a big deal and I need to dig in quickly. Now contrast that with this graph. This actually doesn't look that bad at all. You see the little red circle here. We have a small spike above a consistently loaded host. I think that we've just eclipsed some arbitrary threshold in our detection phase of our incident management practice. I've gotten alerted to it. I certainly need to respond to it in a timely manner, but my approach and how much context I need to dig into, and really everything about the way this incident is going to get handled, has now been informed in a meaningful way by that graph. So how about we just insert that into the alert stream? Why is that a thing that our incident management teams have to go and look for and find and debate through the various bottlenecks that we just discussed, which is relevant? Why not just insert that directly into the alert stream? This is really what I'm talking about when I say the value of situational context for teams. This is the way to empower your first responders to really reduce that time to repair. Give them some context, not just that a particular condition has been met, but what are the associated data points that make that condition more meaningful. And in this example, this is a pretty simple example, obviously, but I've thrown that load graph in. Fortunately for this particular responder, I chose the one that doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal, and they can go back to whatever they were doing before. And I've also got a direct link to the relevant runbook for this particular alert. All that's really doing is taking the context that an incident responder is getting manually and automatically injecting it in the event stream via this incident management system. Last quick poll here. How many folks are doing something like this today? Some sort of dynamic enhancement of their alert streams? Simple true or false question.
Hopefully everybody can answer this one. It's a pretty easy one. One final reminder about the questions for Matt. If you have any, please feel free to get them in at any time. And again, we are going to be putting the poll results out on Twitter. And I think we'll give you guys no more time. So, oh, we're split 50-50. What do you think, Matt?
We're split. That's actually better than I expect. This is by no means a new idea, but it's certainly an idea that's gaining traction. So hopefully for those who've answered in the negative, this can convince you that it's worth spending some time on. So let's kind of get back. As I mentioned when we were talking about bottlenecks, we see a lot of those pains exacerbated as teams sort of grow DevOps practices. And I think that a core tenet that we all familiar with in DevOps is CI/CD. That really exacerbates the contextual challenge for teams. Certainly, the root of many incidents can be tracked to a deploy. We've changed the state of a system, and that frequently can be a causal or contributing factor. We all want developer velocity from our teams. That's a core mover for our business and a differentiator in our ability to compete in the marketplace. But that means we're introducing constant change. And keeping your on-call teams aware of those sort of deployments and those changes that are being introduced to the environment is massively difficult. And at scale, particularly in large organizations, there are fundamental silos that are impairing that communication and in prohibiting an incident responder from establishing this meaningful context. The classic example is we have devs who are on call and we have ops who are on call. Ops is using ServiceNow and dev is using Jira. Great. The ops team has no visibility into what's being done in the deployment pipeline. How can we get any context? And the answer here, again, is going to be a great example of a tale of two incidents. This time, this pesky test web host server is no longer responding on HTTP connection refused. Okay, that's not good. We should probably do something about it. Here, we've injected into the alert timeline information about deployments associated with this system. At the bottom, we've got a type of a Jira webhook, an informational alert, so this isn't going to page anyone. But when I, the incident responder, see this connection refused, I also see that 4 minutes ago, we deployed to it with a, quote, fix for the node thread locking issue. Now, maybe that means that this is causal, and maybe it isn't, but I now have a more clear picture of the context surrounding my situation than I did before. All of this stuff that I'm showing everyone from an enhanced alerting standpoint is possible with the VictorOps platform and certainly other, I think, incident management systems that enable you to take lots of data from any external system and inject them into your alert stream and provide this enhanced alerting experience. You know, I'll state something that we, I think, all intuitively grasp, but really what we're doing here is forming observations to further our diagnostic procedure, which is consistent with the scientific method. We make an observation, there's some measurement, a connection is refused. Without any other information, I can ask a question, why would the web server quit working? But I don't have anything to go on towards forming a hypothesis, let alone a testable hypothesis, which is what we're going to do to actually remediate the issue. I've spanned my detection, my response phases with a lot of time, but nothing really actionable. Now we've got a little bit more information. We have a clear picture of situational context. My incident responder can form a testable hypothesis because we just deployed. Should we roll that back? Should we look at that commit? We've got a breadcrumb and a trail that we can start investigating. So let's take a moment and just kind of discuss the cautionary piece of this, which is Sandstorm. It sounds great to give my responders lots of context, but the anti-pattern within that is to overwhelm them with data and actually confuse and muddy the waters. This is all sort of from a thing that I cringe at when I hear people talk about it, and that's measure all the things. This movement within DevOps, which is really well-intentioned. Again, to the scientific method comment, you have to have metrics to make an observation for certain. I do not think you need to have metrics for everything. As a great absurd example, I can measure the number of processes running on a particular system associated with a user, not a system user, and their duration. That's a metric that I could be measuring. Why should I? It is very much an anti-pattern today that I sort of argue against when I talk to teams about these challenges. The reality is that metrics take time to create and money to store and process. You're spending CPU and disk and network on a great deal of stuff that your team's never going to use. That overwhelming sort of sandstorm of data really creates subconscious filtering and selection bias in your incident responder. And that's sometimes an unknown blind spot is worse than a known blind spot. Probably the most concerning part of that trend is the natural impulse in teams to create alerts out of them. I would suspect, I don't have a poll on this, so don't worry, that everyone on the call has been part of a team where we have been measuring some metric for a long time, disk space utilization on a particular host, and it's never gone above 80%. How about we make an alert when it goes above 80%? Because we're sure it shouldn't, and if it does, that means something wrong. Down this road lies an awful lot of unactionable alerts, alert fatigue for your teams, and really sort of noise in the system. You are creating a sandstorm, not significant context for your incident responders. So again, enhance. We've got an alert with some context. No, please, this is too much. I'm overwhelmed. I don't even know what to do with all of this data. Oh, good. Stacked graphs, said no one ever. This is great. This team is clearly measuring everything, and anyone on the call today who thinks they can say something meaningful about this center XVDD, right throughput, 12 different colors lined up on top of each other graph, please drop that in a question. I'll try and get you a t-shirt after the call. This is meaningless. I've got a lot of lines here, but the incident responder can't make any sense of it. So beware of the sandstorm that you can create for your teams when you start really investigating ways to make context easier for them to achieve. A great rule of thumb is to measure much, not all, much. Alert on some, way less than you're measuring, but contextualize all. If you think it's important enough to alert on, it certainly is important enough to provide a few breadcrumbs of additional context for that responder to correctly and efficiently manage that incident. Like all things in DevOps, iteration here is key. For those folks who answered false, about half of the respondents, to whether you're doing this today, you have to start somewhere, and I guarantee where you start is not where you're going to end. You should try a bit and see what works. Conduct those blameless postmortems however you find the time to do it so that you can objectively assess what's helping the team and what isn't. and experiment with more and less. How much, my example had 2 additional annotations. Maybe you want 4, maybe 1 is enough. Just sort of play with that, and remember that in your analysis phase of your incident management lifecycle, you're talking not only about the incident, but how did the team respond in a blameless way? What could we do to make them more responsive next time, and to reduce our focus metric here of time to remediate or time to resolve? So, as a summary for everybody here, providing incident responders with context at the point of the alert can meaningfully impact MTTR. It gets them closer to resolution than forcing them to manually find this context. It's going to pay you dividends in time. That my position is you need to reinvest in your incident management practice so you can meaningfully move it forward. Now, the dividend of moving incident management forward certainly is that your team is happier, they're spending less time fighting fires, but really it's also going to impact the other metrics that are meaningful to the business, like SLA, like resilient architecture, like architectures that recover from failure, because we're able to focus on that new core metric, the time to learn. So remember, we started with this low maturity, lots of time fighting fires, no time within our team to really move forward. And what we're trying to get to is here, thoughtful analysis and actionable work that sets our team up to be ready for the next phase of our incident management and the next time something goes beep, beep, beep in the night. I'm a little bit under time, but hopefully this has been helpful for everyone. Again, thank you very much for joining today. I'd very much like to encourage you all to take the IMA right after we get off the call. It's at victorops.com/IMA. Again, my name is Matthew Beckman. I'm at Matthew Beckman on Twitter. I'd love to carry the conversation on there. If you've got questions you want to ask out of band, please hit me up. And then, of course, all of the slides. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go right ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say all of the slides from today's talk are going to be available on DevOps.com. I'll also have them up on SlideShare. You can search on my name and find them there.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Before we actually get into questions, I do want to let you guys know that it's not too late. If you do have a question for Matt, please feel free to submit it now, and we'll take a look at them. But we actually do have one courageous soul who came up with an XVDD graph conclusion, Matt. So I want to share that with you first before we get into the questions.
Excellent.
His, Lex's answer was, most hosts are at about the same amount of write throughput. That's about the most meaningful conclusion that he can make, though. So
I think that's worth the T-shirt. Let's follow up afterwards, and we'll get them hooked up. If nothing else, I applaud the effort.
There you go. There you go. So we do have a couple questions, but as a reminder, guys, if you do have a question for Matt, feel free to get it in now. So the first question is from Alex, who's asking, what kind of results are you seeing from IMA?
Yeah, honestly, it's early, and you can expect, and I should have said this during the talk, you can expect that there will be a lot of content that we'll share with the community as we get to, true statistical significance in terms of the number of responders and the sort of the breadth of backgrounds for the respondents. But the early results are sort of what you'd expect, and that's what I referred to earlier, is just a nice sort of blend of people at various maturities from various backgrounds in all of those different phases. I think that a thing that we see, and again, without lots of significance behind this statement or statistical significance, is that while detection, response, and remediation tends to be relatively high, that analysis and readiness still tends to lag. And that's, again, very much part of what I'm focused on here today is trying to reiterate the value of spending time in those spaces so that you can really learn from the incidents that you're managing.
Okay, great. Great. We have another question here from Michael, who's asking, he understands what you're saying about context, but doesn't this just take as much time to maintain all these alert enhancements as the actual remedy would without it? So.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, the short version is yes. In some ways, you're going to have to spend some time to start. I think my slides are still up. If you're here, you've got to start somewhere and spend a little bit of time to get off that that treadmill. But certainly with our platform, and I think other ways you may try and bring context to your responders, there's lots of things that you can leverage from a regular expression standpoint and sort of nested conditionals that enable you to automate the creation of that incident. So it isn't like you are artisanally crafting the contextual enhancement with every alert. You're able to do some basic things within the system that pulls that context out dynamically for you. So again, I think that you do have to spend some time for certain, but relative to other activities that you could do within any one of those phases, the time and the return on that investment in time is really great. And very much to the point of mean, it affects all of your alerts and all of your incidents, not just a few, not just the worst.
Okay. All right. Great. Quick reminder, guys, if you have questions for Matt, there's still time to go ahead to get them in. Just use the questions tab there on the console and submit them. Next question is from Linda, who's asking, is a little graph really going to save a responder any actual time? A little graph.
Not always, and that's that's a great question, and certainly depending on what the root cause of this was or wasn't, the example that I'm sharing here, maybe is more or less significant, and that's where I think iteration, is the answer to that question. Is a little graph enough? Maybe, and maybe not. And if it isn't, then find out what is. If we think back to some of the responders of our early poll, which of those things are most painful? If the source of truth is the most painful thing for your team today, start by adding a few enhanced alerts that are pointing people to the source of truth. If you have duplicate runbooks, start by adding just the link to the proper runbook associated with the host or service or application that we're monitoring. You've got to be objective in terms of what works. And the graph is certainly a great example because it's easy to see and visualize for this medium, but it's by no means the limit of what you can do with empowering your incident responders with more or less situational context.
Excellent. Okay, great. We've got a couple more questions here. We've got one here from Christopher, who's asking, he says his company is really just struggling to keep up. So how can they implement a big system change like this? It sounds like it's a little overwhelming.
It's a very good question, and I would sort of suspect based on the way that question is worded, this is Christopher may be in a place with relatively low maturity, which is a different way of stating we just haven't focused on incident management much yet. And I think you have to be, much like I said, you've got to be objective about what works in this idea of situational context. You should be objective about what works for your team. If actually making time to resolution smaller, if making your incident management practices better is important, I think the rest of the argument sort of follows that one of the most, if not the most, meaningful way to impact incidents across the board is with the way you manage the incident, sort of systemically and procedurally. You could invest in detection systems, you could spend time trying to make your infrastructure better, but without that sort of linchpin of an on-call practice, those efforts will get you a little ways, but then they're going to fall short because you're not spending the rest of your time analyzing and preparing for the next incident. But at the same time, as I in my intro slide, I mentioned I'm a startup junkie, so I've got a lot of empathy for teams that are in kind of Christopher's place. And the best answer I can say is when you need or want to have this focus present, it'll be fairly clear. And I'd certainly advocate for you to start making that argument in your team today that this focus can reap benefits well outside of the sort of limited scope of an on-call team.
Excellent. Okay, great. I hope that helped, Christopher. Okay, next question. is from Stephen, who's asking, what kind of guidance does the IMA offer when I complete it? And how much detail does it go into?
Yeah, it's a good question, and the answer is some, while keeping it still fairly high level. So if you go back to sort of let's just say an example of readiness, the readiness phase, which again is like that preparedness phase, a team that's at very low, maybe novice level maturity there, what we're going to offer in the analysis is here behaviors that teams in the next bucket up, or the next maturity level up from you, these are the ways that they responded to those questions. These are the languages that those teams are using. So part of it is sort of directly derived from the sort of format of the survey itself. But the other part of it is some specific ideas that we've heard from customers that we worked with, or people in the market, or the community that we've engaged with, that has helped them move from A to B. So it's not going to be specific enough to tell you, the key to all of your problems is to tune your Nagios thresholds another 3 points. But it is going to give you language and behaviors that people in other buckets are exhibiting, that you can then focus on and bring back to your next postmortem or your next iteration and say, let's try and start talking about it in this way. The way we responded with this incident was this, but I now know that a different way to respond is down this path, and hopefully that sort of gets you started down the path of more mature incident management practice.
All right, great. Well, that is actually all the questions that we have. If anybody has any other final questions for Matt, you can go ahead and get them in now. But I do want to remind the audience that this webinar is going to be available on demand in about 24 hours on devops.com. So if you've missed any part of this webinar, please feel free to log on. You'll receive a link in your email, and you can just listen to the webinar on demand as many times as you'd like, because it's such a great webinar. Matt, you've done a great job explaining a lot of this, and I'm sure the audience is very appreciative of the information. I think at this point we're going to go ahead and close out the webinar. Want to remind everybody to go on devops.com, take a look at our list of upcoming webinars, and also maybe check out some past webinars. And Matt, thank you again for your time today. It was some really great information, and I hope everybody has a great day.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.